WshNetwork. Like we saw in the last video with the Wish shell, the WshNetwork object is built into the Windows script host, so it's always available, ready to be used. The WshNetwork object is another object that you'll use frequently in your scripts. It allows you to gain access to things like login information, network drives, and printers. And like with our Wish shell we saw in the previous video, accessing the WshNetwork is almost exactly the same. We simply need to use set to create the interface to WScript.network. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can use the WshNetwork object in our VB scripts. Now in this example here, I have a script called login.vbs which uses the WshNetwork object to find out a few things about our current login details. Now on the first line of our script here, we've set the interface to the WshNetwork object, and you'll probably notice that the only thing that's changed in this line from that of our previous video is simply the word network here at the end. Now the last three lines of this script simply echo out the values of a couple of network properties, namely the domain in which this computer lives, the computer name of this server, and the currently logged on user. And this sort of information is really useful when the script you're planning on writing is a logon script. But I will point out something that may not yet be obvious to you at this stage. This is only useful for the current user. This is not designed to be used for remote users, as these values will only pull the information for the current user. So if you're running the WshNetwork object, just keep this in mind, as this will only affect the current user's profile, not remote ones. Alright, well let's go and run our script now. We'll go to the command prompt and we'll run login.vbs. And it simply returns to us the domain, the computer name, and the currently logged on user, which of course is me, using the administrator's account. Now I did mention at the start of this video that the WshNetwork object does have other uses as well. We could use it to map network drives. So we've got another script here, mapdrives.vbs. Okay, so in this script here, we've again set the interface to the WshNetwork object, and then we've used the map network drive method to map a new network drive, and we're simply giving it the letter H, and we're going to map it to this path, this UNC path of server01/data. Okay, so let's quickly go and run this script. We'll go to our command prompt and we'll run mapdrives.vbs. And we can see it's done, and if we go and open up my computer, down here you can see the newly mapped drive. Now we can of course remove drives that are currently mapped as well, and we'll do that by using the remove network drive method of the WshNetwork object. So here I've got another script here called mapdrives2, and like the other scripts, the first thing we're going to do up here at the top is set the interface to the network object. Now next, we've used this enumerate network drives method to list all current network drives that are attached to this computer, and we're going to place that in a variable called col_drives. Now here we've used a for next loop to step through each drive and remove it from the computer. Now there's a couple of things to point out about this script that might not be clear to you at this stage. When you use the enumerate drives method, it will return two items back for each mapped drive. The first is the drive letter itself, and the second is the share path. This means that if we were to use a simple for each loop to remove the network drives, the first time this script passes, it's going to find the drive H that we added in the last script, and it's going to remove it just fine. But the second time it passes through, it will find the share path of server01/data, the UNC path, and it won't be able to remove it since it's not a real drive letter, and our script's going to fail. So the reason that we start here with a count value of -1 is that we want to ignore the last item in the collection, which won't be a valid drive letter. And of course, since we want to ignore every second item in the collection, which is going to be the UNC path name, not a drive letter, we'll use step 2 to bypass every second item. Alright, well let's run this script here. I'll go to my command prompt. We'll run mapdrives number 2. Okay, it's done. We'll go back to Windows Explorer, and there you can see that the drive we mapped in the previous script is now gone. Okay, well let's move on and take a look at how we can use the WshNetwork object to manipulate our printers as well. So up here I have another script called mapprinter.vbs. Now in this script I've provided two ways of basically performing the same task. Now the first method, I've created a literal up here that specifies a UNC path to a printer called HP Color 5500 that sits on a server called Chief. Now next, we've used the add Windows printer connection method and passed it the UNC path. Now underneath this here, we have another method that basically does exactly the same thing. Although notice here that we've used add printer connection, and this method of course differs from the other one in that the keyword here of Windows is missing from this one. So these two are different. Now here we have provided a local port of LPT1, the UNC path of the printer. We've also specified that this printer mapping should be persistent by using the true keyword. Now if you don't want this printer mapping to be persistent, or in other words, remain as a printer on this computer after it's rebooted, then you can simply remove this keyword altogether and just leave the commas like you see here, so this field's blank, and then the default will be set to false. Now finally, I've provided a username and password for this printer. Just be aware that this is all in clear text, so if you do plan on using a username and password here, that anyone who opens up the script will be able to read it. And as an aside, anything from that keyword true up until here that I've just highlighted is actually optional, so you don't have to enter in those fields at all. Alright, well, we have two different lines here, so what's the difference between the two of them? Well, in most cases, you're probably going to use this first option, as applying the add Windows printer connection method is the recommended method for Windows systems. Windows versions from Windows 2000 and above will automatically download the drivers for the printer from the server if it doesn't have them, which in my case would be the server up here called Chief. Now if you're using Windows 95 or 98, then the comments that I provided here in green, you would need to add in a driver as well as an optional port. Now if you need to map network printers for MS-DOS machines, then you should use the second option here, the add printer connection method, and then assign it a local port like LPT1. Now finally, we can also set a default printer by using a line like this, where we've simply used the set default printer method and we've passed it a name of our printer. And that's probably one of the easiest things you'll ever have to do in your scripting career. Now you've probably already noticed that this line of code here is inside a subroutine. Now of course, this doesn't have to be inside a subroutine at all. I've only thrown that in at this point because it's not yet something that we've discussed so far in this video series. Now a subroutine is really useful when you have a script that needs to run certain sections of code multiple times. Some people I talk to like to use them just to create sections of code for them to manage it easier. But in my opinion, they're really most useful for reusing code. Now by reusable code, I mean code that you need to run as part of your script and then come back later on in the same script and run that same piece of code again. Rather than writing out the code twice in your script, you could simply use a subroutine and then call the subroutine as many times as you like. So a subroutine has three parts. We start it with the word sub and then give it a name. Now in my case, you can see I've called mine printer sub. Now the next part of our subroutine is simply whatever code that you want to run when we call the subroutine, and finally the last part is ending the subroutine with the words end sub. Now to use our subroutine, we simply have to call that, and I've basically done that up the top here of our script by simply calling printer sub. And that's basically it. Subroutines are really easy to implement, and they can really cut down scripting time on long scripts, as you only need to write the code once and you can call it as many times as you like. Now like with mapping our network drives, these printer mappings can easily be added to our logon scripts to set up printers and shares rather easily. But since I don't actually have a network printer here available on my network to demonstrate how mapping a printer would work, unfortunately you're just going to have to take my word for it, but mapping a network printer is really easy, just like you saw with the network drive. Alright, now even though I did use the enumerate network drives method in the previous script, we never really saw its output, since behind the scenes it simply removed our map drive. So let's go and take a look at another script that shows us a little bit more information about our mappings. Alright, now in this script we first set the interface to the WshNetwork object, and then we've used the enumerate network drives and enumerate printer connection methods to grab a list of all network drives and printers that are currently connected to this computer. Now, like we saw in an earlier script, we've created here a for next loop, and it's going to return back 2 items for each map drive. Now, the first, of course, is going to be the drive letter itself, and that'll be this one here, and the second is going to be the share path. So if we take a closer look at this WScript echo statement, here we're going to echo out the first item that appears in our collection, which of course, as I said, is going to be the drive letter that we've assigned to this mapping, and then we're going to go and grab the second item in our collection as indicated by our I+1, and that's going to be the share path or the UNC path if you prefer. And of course, the process down here is exactly the same for our printers as well. So we'll go to the command prompt, we'll run our script, but before I do that, I'm actually going to run map drives again just to make sure that we do actually have a map drive to show you. Okay, now we'll go back and we'll run enum.vbs. And here we can see the results. It loops through and it's found any shared drives or any shared network printers. And of course in the middle here you can see it's found our drive H, which of course is mapping to server 01/data. Now, one final thing I probably should point out for those that don't already know is how to actually assign a log on or a log off script for that matter so that it runs using group policy. So I'm going to come down here, we'll click on Start, Administrative Tools, and I'm going to launch Active Directory Users and Computers. Now, since it is a vanilla Windows 2003 operating system that I'm using here, I don't have the GPMC management console installed. That's okay, we don't really need it anyway. So for the purposes of this video, I'm simply going to use the domain as my target here. So I'm going to right click on the domain winstructorlab.com. We'll choose Properties. Then we'll select the Group Policy tab. And I'll just edit the default domain policy here. So I'll click the Edit button. Okay, now under our user configuration, I'm going to expand Windows Settings and we'll select Scripts. Now in the right hand side of our console here, we can either choose the log on or log off scripts, which are rather self-explanatory. Log on scripts run when a user logs onto their computer. Log off scripts run when a user logs off their computer. So we'll just right click on either of these and we'll select Properties. And finally the Add button. Okay, now we'll simply need to click on the Browse button and then select the script that you want to add. Now if it's not here in this folder, and that's the folder tree that you can see here, then go and grab a copy of your script and copy it here into this folder, since you'll want your script to be stored here to make sure that it replicates to your other domain controllers properly. Okay, now once you've correctly selected the script you want to add, simply click the Open button, followed by OK, and then OK again, and that's it. Now in this video, we've taken a look at the WshNetwork object. Whilst the WshNetwork object itself doesn't have a lot of different methods available to use, it's a useful and practical object, especially when you want to create logon scripts, since mapping drives and printers are two things that a logon script often does.